guess.
You might want to speak here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Great. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Drawing Matter. I'm Matt Page, and this is Kendra Matchett. And together we've been organising Drawing Matter's public programme. The latest event, or series of events, are these on Collage that we've been working with Sam Jacob on. The ambition for Drawing Matter's public programme, now that we're in London, we've been here since October 2024, after having been in Somerset for many years, is to sort of really use our new access to different audiences to get people into the archive and experience the drawings in different ways. So some of these ways are weekend exhibitions or talks like this, sort of video series on the website, and other projects like that. And so we're very excited this evening to have brought Sam in to talk to us about collage. Particularly interesting for us to focus on a particular tool of representation or a medium rather than a historical period or typology of building or something like that. We've worked with Sam or had various encounters with Sam in the past, including lending drawings to the exhibition he did called Disappear Here, which was at the RIBA in 2017. Also working on an opera that we staged in Somerset at Shetwell Farm, where we reconstructed a mausoleum that was originally designed by Adolf Loos, reinterpreted by Sam, and then reinterpreted again as Dido's tomb. He's also participated in our Alternative Histories exhibition, which some of you might be familiar with, in which we invited about 70 architects from the UK and Europe to respond to drawings in the collection by making a model in response. So yeah, we're very excited for this evening, which will be very dynamic, I'm sure.
We'll see about that, Matt. We'll see
Maybe
about
interactive. Yeah, and Sam's this is slightly interactive, I think. Evening, is going to go ahead, and tomorrow Sam's leading a workshop for 20 participants in the archive using this amazing collage chest from Super Studio. So we've reproduced the material that's in it, and so tomorrow all this collage material will be used to make new collages, which should be good fun, I think.
Absolutely.
And then there's a lovely exhibition of that work, including our own material and Sam material on Sunday. So if you want to come and see that, that's open 12 to 5 on Sunday. It's a nice opportunity to see the response of these participants tomorrow. I don't know if anybody in the audience is actually coming tomorrow. And to put that beside, amazing works by Super Studio, for example, is the main protagonist in this series. So yeah, enjoy the evening.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Kendra. Thanks all for coming on a Friday night. I know there's other things you could be doing. Drawing Matt asked me if I wanted to do something, and I said yes, absolutely. I'd like to do something on collage, and this is sort of really built up around this magic chest, which, as Kendra said, is like a kind of holy grail. It's the source material for Super Studio's collages, which you can see many. Here's one, there's one a couple over there. And so this is the stuff that they were using. I'm going to talk a little bit about why that was important at that time, like working with magazines and media images and stuff like that. But Vera from Drawing Matter has scanned and printed some of the contents. Now, don't steal any of this because we're using it tomorrow to make our pseudo Super Studio collages. But have a look. It's so nice to have a look at them. This is interactive, right? So I'm going to just talk about stuff. It's a bit personal. I said, of course, collage starts at the beginning of the 20th century. And Kendra was like, Sam, no, that's not right. Like 17th century, whatever. And I was like, okay, maybe I won't try and do a proper art history of collage, right? I'll just talk about what I know about collage, which kind of begins here. This is the sort of, let's say, the collage culture which I knew as a young person growing up, which is the sort of, you know, the artwork or the visual culture of, I suppose, punk, really, like Jamie Reed and with God Save the Queen, and Linda with the for the Buzzcocks, which of course had a kind of attitude towards it. And I knew I wasn't quite old enough to be a punk, but obviously you kind of knew this. You knew this stuff like everyone does. And of course, it comes with an attitude. It comes with politics. It comes with a kind of, you know, fuck you, the Queen, and all this kind of stuff. So it was interesting. It was interesting. And it kind of, I mean, it's partly comes through art history, which I found out about a little bit later. So through these people, Vivienne Westwood and Malcolm McLaren, be reasonable, demand the impossible, which is a quote stolen from Paris, May 68, stolen from somebody else, right? Che Guevara, I think. Anyway, so a kind of radical phrase that gets passed down through the generations. And I really I suppose I really understood one narrative of this kind of cultural idea through this book, which I read when I was about 18, I think. Grail Marcus, Lipstick Traces, A Secret History of the 20th Century, in which he basically says, he goes backwards from punk, and he goes, it takes it all the way back to Dada. So this is Hannah Hoch, which is 1919, a kind of early Dada collage. So it's kind of interesting to think, oh yeah, I'm a young guy who likes interesting things, and then someone lays it out like how you can understand that, and it became very useful, I suppose. And as anyone who knows anything about the situation is, or anyone who was at architecture school in the 90s, this famous collage by Guy Debord, which over here we have an original, whatever it was original. What was it, Matt? This is a poster from...
Yeah, it's like a guide.
Yeah. And somewhere, Matt, I think, has the original map of Paris, which Guy Debord chopped up. Voila. Reassembled. Thank God Paris is put back together again. Of course, this is a map chopped up, which of course you can't do with maps because that screws up what the whole point of what a map is. But it talks about a different type of engagement with the city, or a different way of understanding the city or the experience of the city, the derive, as they called it. I bought some stuff. Some of this is mine, mixed up with pieces from Drawing Matter's collection, but this is a piece I bought by an artist called Layla Curtis, which, if you look at it from a distance, it looks like a map. But come and have a look later on, and you'll go, "What the hell is going on?" It's in these pieces, it's like road atlases cut up. So it's not quite as obviously radical. It's more sneaky in a way of like how maps can be reused. But I suppose one thing that's interesting, why were they chopping up printed material, basically, which I suppose is kind of one very blunt definition of collage. Well, maybe it's because through the 20th century, the amount of printed material just, kind of grew exponentially. And in some ways, what Guy Debord's talking about here is a different psychogeographic way of understanding the city, but it's also in a tradition of surrealism. So you could think, on one hand, this is the very end of the 19th century, very beginning of the 20th century, like, the interpretation of dreams, Freud, surrealist collages, which are taking, let's say, the world where it's supposed to make sense, in magazines and in books, and somehow understanding a different dream life of this world of images. So the sort of chopping up and reassembling was a way perhaps to talk about the unconscious life that existed within magazines and printed material, which you could say, in a sense, is what this is, this box. And if you look through the stuff, you can already see the way in which they're selecting the kinds of things they chopped out of magazines, like car commercials, cigarette commercials, fashion shoots. It's a way of, let's say, engaging with the surface of media as it's presented to you, and literally, chopping into it, like remaking it. I would say maybe these are two important things. Oh, okay.
That's a magic number. It is. It's the magic number.
So,
Somewhere in this hip-hop community was born you. It's the ability, and that's a magic number.
so we have Richard Hamilton here and De La Soul from about 1988, 1989, something like this. What is it that makes today's home so appealing, was made as the poster for this exhibition, This Is Tomorrow, which was at the Whitechapel. Let me see if this works. Ha. No. Too many different things here. Ha, here we go. Anyone an expert in PowerPoint? I would say maybe. Do you need to see this on the camera, or can you can see the cover of this, right? Yeah. So this was a exhibition, kind of independent group exhibition. Here we have Peter Smithson, Eduardo Paolozzi, Alison Smithson, and Nigel Henderson as one of the central groups. Here we have Smithson's Collage. Voila. And a invitation to a Richard Hamilton show, which is two postcards put on top of each other, one kind of column on top of another. And I suppose the independent group were interested in this kind of new world of consumerism, the kind of post-war things they saw, first of all, in America, and the kind of youth culture which was emerging there. And then when it started to come to the UK, so figures like Rayner Banham, who went on to write about consumer culture, the fins of 1950s cars. Much later, Star Wars is a kind of mythical text. Crinkle cut crisps as a way of understanding American culture. So it was always sort of that, they were all looking at, let's say, popular culture. Smithson's wrote a thing called Now We Collect Adverts. So despite their, let's say, austere reputation, there are other traditions within the Smithson sort of body of work. This image, of course, is made up of like things cut out of magazines, like a lot of adverts, and assembled into a idea of like lifestyle as defined by products and lifestyle as defined by media, you could say. This is a bit weird. Hold on a second. While I do this, but I was playing that De La Soul because it's a song obviously made out of many, many samples. And if I can get this to work, then you'll see all of the references which are not there. I knew this was going to be too interactive, Kendra. How do I get out of this one? Anyone, actually literally anyone good at PowerPoint? Huh?
Just like imagine that there is a screen that continues.
Oh, okay.
So just drag it.
Which way? This way?
Go to the right. Try the
Right.
right.
Oh.
Now we will see your note.
Oh. How do I get to the next slide then? I'm going to quit and then...
I think you have clicked on the notes, that's why. If you click on any outside of the note.
Oh, okay. So I click there. No way, man.
Arrow next.
I'm going to close it. Okay. Okay, here we go. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. It's not a bad track. Anyway, so this is all of the these are all of the sources for Richard Hamilton's collage. The main room is from an advertisement for Armstrong Royal Floors in a June 1995 issues of Ladies' Home Journal. And this is a list of all of the samples in 3 Feet High and Rising, or Me, Myself and I, whatever it was. Now, what I like about the idea of collage is the fact that it takes multiple things and puts them together. So this is a diagram which says collage is good, basically. So this is let's say the creative fields, like where you're working. This is all the other stuff from around which you're assembling, like little pieces and fragments. Whether you're Richard Hamilton, whether you're De La Soul, whoever you may be, whether you're Super Studio, and you bring them into this field and you find an arrangement for them, and then that comes out and it becomes the work. So it is multiple, relational, social, cultural, and therefore good. Back when I was younger, I would have said there is also bad ways to work. Things which are singular, which have an internal logic, which are self-referential. Bad. So the 22-year-old me would have said, hip-hop good, trance bad. And I don't know how to do this. This is Jam and Spoon, by the way. I don't know if you remember anybody remembers him. About 1992. I don't know how to make this play anymore, but you can imagine. You know what trance music sounds like, right? So it's like one thing which just generates itself and generates itself. It doesn't really refer to anything else. This is what we at FAT would have said is problematic in architecture in the 90s. And I'll talk a bit more about why we thought that later on. But I wanted to talk, so collage definitely involves media. It has to involve media. It has to involve stuff. It has to involve records or magazines or books or whatever. It has to involve other bits of source material. It could be anything, which can then be reassembled into something new. Now, next bit of interaction. This is a diagram. I'll pass it around. I'm also going to do this, actually. This is a diagram which I'll pass this one around. You can look at this. It's a diagram I made for the school that I teach at, which is the Angewandte in Vienna. And we did a timeline, or what we call a chronoscape, of the school, for like how to try to understand it. I'll put it up here for later on. And it runs from about 1880 to the future. And it involves all of the people the kind of conditions which Austria was. Was it an empire? Was it a democracy? Was it a dictatorship? Was it a member of the EU? All those kinds of things. Kind of Austrian culture, Viennese culture. So you have, atonality, for example, the interpretation of dreams. We've got the invention of football philosophy, Danubian football philosophy. Then we have more architectural things. Everything is architecture, Hans Hollein. There is a selection of Hans Hollein over on that table over there. Architecture Must Burn, Kurt Pimmelblau. The Presence of the Past, Hans Hollein was a participant in. And of course, Falco, those of you who know Austrian culture as well as me, at least one of you does, with his hit Rock Me Amadeus, which seems to make total sense between Architecture Must Burn and The Presence of the Past. It totally explains why Falco could only have existed in Vienna at a certain moment in time. So this is a chart trying to put together ideas, time, conditions, etc., etc., etc. The one bit I wanted to talk to you about was this very small bit here, which is media tools. So you have along here, the invention of the die line. You have the invention of the rotating pen. You have the invention of cow gum. Liza. The invention of the photocopier, the invention of the kind of mass availability of the SLR camera, etc., etc. And you suddenly see, of course, that the technology allows different ways of working, different ways of engaging. In some senses, that's just a list of technologies, and we all know that technologies themselves are, not neutral. But there's also cultures that come along with technology. So these are two, I guess, important projects for early FAT. So FAT was a practice which I was involved in from the mid-90s to the middle of 2010s, fashion architecture taste. And after a while, we were very interested in not only the architect for this, Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown, of course, but especially this project, the Football Hall of Fame, which has a big billboard on the front, and of course, a wonderful collage to illustrate the chapel-like interior of the building. But also this kind of thinking, Marshall McLuhan, like thinking about media. In this case, the medium is the massage. But the idea that, in a way, we could understand architecture as a form of information, or a kind of extension of media, you might say. That it was about communication, that it kind of existed not just as a physical act, but also through all of this kind of stuff, the ways in which it's communicated, the way in which it's consumed, etc., etc. So this was a house made out of neon, that kind of the material that you make signs out of, making a house. And it was also, I guess, the driver for a lot of the kinds of images which we were producing, which were collages, to some extent. They were digital, but here a kind of typical modern suburban house covered with camouflage, and the same with its interior. We liked this because it sort of talked about the surface as something communicative, as architecture as a sort of media object. And we also, I guess, we began to understand it in relation to ideas of postmodernism, like Charles Jenks's double coding, for example. So here you have a doubly coded object. It's a house and something military. What else does it talk about? Well, that's something you could sort of investigate or put on the couch. But we made a lot of these kinds of images, cutting things up. Sometimes, to try to understand relationships, like what's the relationship between Baroque decoration and the styling of the front of the car. Sometimes much more kind of unclear why we were making them, more dreamlike images which were just pulling together different pieces in order to make a kind of new sort of world. The process, I think, is worth talking about. So traditionally, collage, this is Peter Kennard, the sort of activist, artist, graphic designer. This is Constable's Haywain with cruise missiles on the back of the cart. He's obviously saying that's cruise missiles are bad. He's not saying cruise missiles are good, although they look kind of cool. But this was a recreation of Peter's desk at a show at the Whitechapel also last year, I think. And you can see on it, he's got all of his printed material. He's got his cutting mat. He's got a Stanley knife. He's got some scalpels. And so he's physically taking things apart and then putting them back together, which is exactly what Super Studio were doing. But we were lucky enough to have the wonderful Photoshop, although Photoshop at the time had no layers, if you can believe it. I don't know, like no layers and one undo. So it's pretty much like really doing a collage, or maybe even worse than doing a collage. But what Photoshop allows, especially now, is something different. So collage, you have an edge, and in Photoshop, you don't have an edge. And I don't know, how many of you use Photoshop on a regular basis? Quite a lot of you. Those of you who don't, should we just show them what Photoshop is like? Okay, here we go. This is a Photoshop file. It's one of mine, and so don't criticize my layers. But this box here, this is all your layers. So this is the equivalent of the stack of pieces of paper that you have in a collage. And here, I don't know how many there are, but you can see like all of these ones. And these are the folders. So then you undo that, and in that layer, there's all of these layers, and sometimes more, like. So although Photoshop started off as a kind of, almost like a simulacrum of doing a collage, or being in a darkroom, somewhere between the two, it started to evolve into something which you really couldn't do in real life. Here we have the black one is a mask, so you can mask off whatever's in that image. So let's see. Well, here's a whole load of other layers which are controlling, like contrast or other aspects of the kind of the way you can control, let's say, the presence of the image. There's brushes, so you can airbrush an edge. So instead of having a cut that you get with a knife or with a pair of scissors, you can make it a much fuzzier edge. So the blending that you can do in Photoshop becomes incredibly sophisticated. I just thought I'd show you Photoshop. So this is the image which you were just seeing. When Photoshop was 25 years old, I wrote a love letter to Photoshop. And basically, it kind of talks about why working in 2 dimensions, apparently, it's all flat. It's like layer, 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 but always flat, was somehow more interesting and more relevant than working in 3 dimensions for an architect, which might sound kind of counterintuitive, but the idea was that it's because it allows you, like Super Studio before, like all of these other people before, it allows you to engage with other stuff and bring it together and, let's say, work on how those different pieces can come together, like how multiple things can become one thing. Systems. Here's some quotes from that piece. Photoshop was originally modeled as a digital darkroom with tools like dodge and burn, echoing photographers' terminology for darkening or lightening images. But Photoshop quickly exploded its own metaphors. Its sheer power and the way it allows us to manipulate have exceeded those old crafts. Photoshop is its own medium, a verb as well as a brand. Through its layers, filters, clone tools, its marquees and masks, its blends, smudges and blurs, its zoom to the level pixel, its cut and pastes, magic wands and marching ants, we can reformulate that moment, turn it into a million other moments, add it to others, fragment it, multiply it. Photoshop decontextualizes photographs from photography, takes images out of their historical moment. Instead, it invents a form of such fine-grained collage, such seamless bricolage, that its own traces are invisible. In an era where image has assumed such overbearing significance, Photoshop is the laboratory where image power is refined into ever more lethal concentrations. It operates as a place of exchange between the world and its imaginative reconfiguration. While it sucks images in, its effects bleed from the screen back into the world, which is to say, like all architectural drawings, they have agency. They change the world. They're not just pictures of the world. Although we do have some pictures of the world. We have a little gang over here. On the left-hand side of that is all collage being used as illustration, which is bad, but sometimes necessary, I would say. Mies doing it, but also Super Studio doing it, somewhat disappointingly. So rather than using collage to declare their radical politics and their desire to change the world, they're trying to win a job, which just hits differently a little bit. So this is 25 years of Photoshop, which must be about another 20 years ago. And of course, the nature of images has changed. And we will look at that a bit more. More from fact. This is how much we believed in Photoshop. This was a thing we wrote, which was on our very early website. Oh, by the way, guys, here's some bits of paper. If you find any of them relevant, I'll hand it over to this side first of all. If you find any of them think they're good, because I've got to do this workshop tomorrow. I think I've got to explain everything again to the participants. So if you want to stick up any things you think would be useful on the board over there, that would be great. You don't have to stick all of them up, just the good ones. So this was a thing called How to Become a Famous Architect, which was basically the thing which made us famous, in fact. But it was a step-by-step program, and it said, becoming a famous architect shouldn't take too long, but don't expect too much. Very true. It's not a passport to riches, nor an introduction to high society. But if it's what you want, here's how to do it. First, pay a visit to any well-stocked newsagent. This was written, I think, about 2000, so it's very much of its moment. Maybe even earlier, maybe late 90s. Buy one copy of each design magazine. You will use these to find out what not to do. Now, go to your local remaindered bookstore. Buy a copy of a design book with lots of pictures in. Not only is the remaindered store cheaper, but its stock is between 10 to 15 years old. These are the least fashionable and so most shocking of all styles. You will use this to copy your new designs from. On the way home, choose a name for your cutting-edge design firm. Something punchy, arty, and a little stupid. Should do. Liza. Those were the days there. Not too many rules. Make sure it doesn't use the word urban or studio. Your name will present an efficient image, suggest an office in a fashionable part of town, and a committed workforce. No one will really know you're really operating out of your bedroom. Now you have your name, you need a project, a radical design of a house. It needs a catchy title. If it sounds good, it is good. Now, this is before Google Images. This is where we still had to scan things in. We had Photoshop where we didn't have immediate access to, endless images. So you had to scan stuff. So scan in the pictures from the Remaindered bookstore, the one you bought there, stick them together in the latest version of Photoshop, play around till you get a nice picture that you can believe in. Check that it doesn't look too much like the pictures in your magazines. So in a way, this is sort of a little bit of what FAT actually did. It's a sort of retelling of our of how we worked. We did that. We did go to the Remaindered bookstore, and that's where we learned architectural history. And we did use Photoshop, and we did design houses with particular names which were never intended to be built. And it kind of did work, actually, to some extent. But I'm just showing this partly so that you realize how committed we were to the idea of collage and Photoshop itself. Here. This is for you. And this was the best book we found at the Remaindered bookstore. This book of architecture drawings. It literally was just a book of architecture drawings. It didn't tell you anything. There were no words in it whatsoever. And it helped us out so much. When we didn't know what to do, we just opened the book and yeah. But we were also really interested in collage, not just as a way of making images, but as a design process itself. And I suppose the one project which we looked at from our, forebears and thought, oh my God, this is it, was OMA's project for La Valette. It's a competition entry for La Valette, which was this strip of bits of landscape. The idea being you take a skyscraper, or you take the skyscraper from Delirious New York, the downtown athletic club, which Delirious New York explains as a kind of sandwich of very many different programs, and lay it flat on the ground. And that is an idea for a park, basically. So that you think of that as a section, it becomes a plan, which was essentially what we stole for one of our earliest projects, the Brunel Rooms in Swindon, a nightclub, which is a strip of different, well, symbolically of different activities. These were the kinds of images we were working on, which were partly Illustrator or freehand, the precursor to Illustrator. It was so good. It was so good. Freehand, I still miss it. But so we were working in freehand and in Photoshop, partly collaging, partly drawing, and it was still partly hand drawn as well. We were scanning in hand drawings, collaging things into it, and I think that in a way that process produces a kind of an architectural space. The running track, the swimming pool, the airport security, and the chill out lounge with the garden shed with a stainless steel slot cut into it, the horrible furniture, the kind of Twin Peaks curtain. So in a sense, it's a kind of a thing made out of objects from different places brought together, which is partly, I guess, a way of understanding what collage does. It takes things out of one place and puts them into another. Other FAT projects which used, I suppose, like the mechanism, you could say, of public art. So bus shelters which were customized by artists in different ways. This was Beaconsfield, who put a thatched roof on a bus shelter on Tottenham Court Road outside a building society. The whole project was about right to buy and the housing crisis. Ha ha ha, how little did we know then that was just the beginning of the end. John Isaacs, who was dressed up in a gorilla suit and did karaoke in Holborn, and Sue Webster and Tim Noble, when they were still working together, with this beautiful sign "Forever" on the top of a bus shelter. Other projects, just placing things in different locations which suddenly make a different understanding. Can you switch on the neon signs or other? This was a project at the Royal Academy Summer Show where we we were such assholes. We went in with sheets of red stickers. And we were also interested in like how things which had existed as, let's say, images to us could also start to become objects. This was a pool table that was a kind of a love letter to Feltham in the suburbs. This was a kind of model railway fantasy called Highland. This was a chaise longue which turns into a landscape. And this was our proposal for the Millennium Bridge, which I think was the origin of the ill-fated Heatherwick proposal for the Garden Bridge. But our proposal was to dig up a slice of Althorpe Park, which was Princess Diana's, kind of family mansion, and bring it to London and string it across the Thames. I think it must have been just after Diana had died. We were very impressed by the kind of the city in that moment of like mourning. It was a very weird place. This was Elton John's lyrics to Candle in the Wind in 98 or whatever it was, carved on the side of it. So it was a kind of idea of like literal collaging of actual real like geography, you could say. Or in space, this was a project for an advertising agency in Amsterdam, Kessel's Kramer, which is inside an old church, but a series of, let's say, disparate objects, a kind of lifeguard, Baywatch style tower, gold-leafed, a Wild West fort, a piece of garden shed, picnic table, a piece of football pitch, almost like fragments of things put together so that the space of the church, the space of the interior, was like being inside this, like chopped out pieces which have not quite been put back together again. So could collage become a space? And of course we were working a lot through collages in Photoshop, but also kind of inventing what these different objects might be. Should it be an aircraft carrier or a seaside pier? And I think trying to understand, you can have this one as well, pass it around. I think the interest in collage also gave us a way to try to understand things outside of, let's say, our immediate circumstances. So when we started to work on, let's say, projects which were maybe more socially engaged, I think collage helped us understand how we could sort of helped us understand those kinds of places, or give us an understanding of how we could take apart and, let's say, put them on the couch and understand what they were dreaming of. This was part of the research we did for some social housing in Manchester, a project as part of New Islington, and it was photographing the interiors of the homes of the residents we were working with to rehouse them. And we just, always amazed by the kind of strange combinations which emerge in real life. Adobe, fireplace, half timbered, busts, tropicality, all these kinds of things together. And the same in the outskirts of Rotterdam, a place called Hoogvliet, which is a sort of post-war new town. So you see this is the sort of social realism of that moment, and then you see the kind of additions, carriage lamp, these kind of combinations of different kinds of dreams coexisting, sometimes in very complex ways. In someone's front garden, if you begin to look and you take it seriously and you think this is a very sincere piece of self-expression, in the same way that you would if you look at Richard Hamilton's work, you begin to think, well, hold on a minute, there's something really important going on here. Could we, understand that as a form of architecture itself? So this was the sort of background research to a park and community building here, which was kind of on the edge of this new town. so like understanding that a world is made up of many, many pieces, both physically, but also those those physical pieces have real significance, I think was an important part of the way we were trying to work. So in a sense, we moved outwards from Photoshop to, say, social environment, or even to small p politics, you could say. Collage is also a way of bringing things together. And so it's also a way that you can create or tell narratives. I'm just going to show this one part. This was the Venice pavilion that we did, one of Fat's last projects, called A Clockwork Jerusalem. David Bickle, thank you very much for picking us and letting us do it. And this was the centerpiece. And it was basically the retelling of the story of modernism in the UK. And so this is the collage which tells the story. This is the beginning. This is the end. So this is ancient Neolithic landscape, Silbury Hill. And then we have ruins. We've got William Blake. We have here Arnold Circus. We've got Second World War. We've got Reconstruction. We have Ebenezer Howard, beginning of Cumbernauld. Barbican, we have like Stonehenge meeting the Royal Crescent in Bath, meeting the Hume Estates in Manchester, seeing the destruction or the demolition of those estates. Into Thamesmead with Clockwork Orange, and here's David Hockney, A Bigger Splash, and then here we are in Milton Keynes, and here's Rayner Banham, and here's Cliff Richard, and here's the dreams of Milton Keynes, which never quite got built. Into the pastoral again, here's the tractor driver from a poster about Milton Keynes by the illustrator Philip Castle, and here's William Morris blending it all together. So this is kind of a collage as a way of trying to like narrate not just a story, but a kind of sentiment about, you know, what was British modernism, if there was ever such a thing. Drawings made of things. I'll pass some of these around now. Here. Anyone else want to go and pick some choice ones and stick them on the wall? Hey, where are they? Oops. Oh, great. Yeah, why not? Yeah. It would be good to see. So this is a section which talks about drawings which are made of drawings, I suppose. Like here, you could say the drawing of a football pitch meets the drawings of other kinds of maps, like talking about different definitions of space, different senses of scale, and so on and so forth. So it's a hand drawing, but kind of a collage of fragments which become a whole. These are sort of half remembered. So it's not quite collage in the sense that it doesn't retain the fidelity that it does when you chop a piece out, because it's, you know, comes through the mists of the mind. But it's a kind of collapse, you could say, or a reconstruction. Is it a ruin, or is it the beginnings of something? Who knows? Which led into this piece, voila, which was made during lockdown. Its title is World of Interiors. Yeah, but it's, you know, it is what it is. It's a world which is made up of plans. So it's a kind of, at that moment, do you remember when we were all inside all of the time? The interior became a very specific, like, thing. So this was a way of dealing with that. I don't know. A way of killing time, for sure. This drawing, which is this one here, which was part of a show which Matt mentioned called Disappear Here, which was about perspective. It was about the strange powers of the vanishing point. So it was trying to talk about, let's say, the weirdness of forms of representation, and how forms of representation are not just pictures of the world, they transform the world, which I suppose is also what I'm trying to say about collage as well. But in this case, how the weird invention of this black dot from which sucks everything into it, or everything comes out of it, not quite clear, but definitely everything goes through it. Thank you very much. Not bad, not bad. So in this show, it was a drawing made, it was a big mega drawing made out of other drawings. So it was made using drawings mainly from the Reba drawings collection, but also some wonderful contributions we borrowed from drawing matter. But it worked on this principle, which is you have, in perspective, you have a horizon and you have a vanishing point. And that's how you make a drawing. You know, every line goes into the vanishing point. And in this arrangement, this is a piece made out of 3 postcards. This is from Hawksmoor, from a sketchbook of a 16-year-old Hawksmoor, which Reba have. This is Lubetkin, and this is Palladio, just up here. And they're all drawings which use perspective. And in this arrangement, they all converge on this vanishing point. So it was a way of taking that system and then placing multiple drawings so they work together. So usually the frame of the drawing is where it stops, but the logic of the drawing is that it carries on forever, the logic of perspective. So it ended up producing this very weird hang of things which are very, you know, too low, too high. So, you know, these are all converging on a vanishing point about here. These you can see here, with also a kind of trompe-l'oeil where the space of the gallery got sucked into the representational, let's say, network that existed on the plane of the wall. So there's sort of an idea that there's something more than just like sticking stuff together. There's forces and systems behind, and logics, you could say, behind the arrangements which are made. Sometimes they might be, you know, kind of strange and dreamlike, you know, like, but this drawing still, it follows the rules of the game of this kind of image, right? Like it looks perfect. It's so exact, even though it's so mysterious and so like impossible. So when we're going to do this workshop tomorrow, it's not just about cutting stuff up and having fun. It's also about the logic of how do you put stuff together. And I think that's maybe the kind of more invisible aspect of collage, because it works so visually, but it's the invisible stuff, the force which binds it somehow, which I think is so significant. This is a set of drawings. It's the zodiac, by the way. This is Aries. This is Pisces. These are all photographs people have taken, which they claim are UFOs, unidentified flying objects, and then they're placed together, you know, where the stars should be. So it's just a way of taking like one system and one set of objects and putting them together. So in this case, the system isn't visual. It's not trying to convince you this is real, which I think is often what's happening in, let's say, super studio drawings. It's more about an arrangement of things in space, etc., etc. Gemini, Taurus. I've got another set of drawings over here. These are some paintings. And they began with these. These are watercolors by His Royal Highness Prince, now King Charles. As you know, Prince Charles is a keen watercolorist, and not bad actually. He's pretty good, I think. He loves to paint Scotland, probably because he owns most of it. Of course, he doesn't paint. He paints a particular version of Scotland, not too much iron brew and pints of heavy and that kind of stuff, more rolling hills. So this was, I don't know what, this was just started as an exercise in what would happen if you started to intervene in those images. These are scans of of Prince Charles's work. Like, that interrupt that idyllic view, make it impossible to understand it. So that became a set of paintings. These are oil paintings bought off eBay, which then were painted into. And these all have a kind of logic to how the shapes are painted in, like from the middle up to here, etc. So there's a sort of, one logic is about the edge of the frame, and one logic is the pictorial space of the picture. I don't know, the more I put this talk together, the more I thought, what actually is a collage? Where do you start and where do you stop? Is this the unified theory of collage? Everything's a collage. This got out of hand. And was also in the same show at Bet's project, there was a set of drawings which took like antique prints, antique etchings and prints of Neolithic stone constructions of one type or another, with other things, geometric shapes placed into them. Or more straightforward versions, these are like more Neolithic things, like etchings of stones. These are the folkloric stories of stones which are sort of made visible. So this, I guess this is more pictorial, right? It's not really challenging the representation, anything like representational. In Philip Johnson's Glass House, thanks. Philip Johnson had a painting by Poussin, which if you sit in the Mies furniture in the right place, you look at this painting that's on a kind of frame, and it's placed so that the horizon of the landscape and the horizon of the painting match, which I think is an absolutely amazing, fantastic conceptual, visual way of putting a painting into a house. So this was a collage, first of all, which reversed that. They put the house into the painting, and then this was a painting of the collage produced in Authen, the so-called oil painting village in Shenzhen. I'll put that there. So various other things. Let me talk a little bit about sources. So one of the things I guess collage does is it loosens things from their original location. So, we have things which told us what architecture was, like Sir Bannister Fletcher's History of Architecture on the Comparative Method, which was definitely the book which I was told this is what you need to know about architecture on day one of going to architecture school. And it organizes architecture in particular ways, which have their own kind of ideas about the world. This is very early, the Tree of Architecture, which is the illustration at the beginning of the book. A later version, and of course it has all of the biases which you would expect from a 19th century British publication. So, that kind of organizes architecture into culture and chronology, et cetera, and gives it a hierarchy. In a way, this is a certain moment of liberation, because it takes the magazine, which also has, it has its cover, it has its, editorial, it has its adverts and whatever, it has its own structure. And when Natalini and co are like getting their scissors out and starting to, chop stuff up, they're suddenly interrupting that organization of information. For us, that's something different. So I talked about FAT when we had to scan things in. Of course, we don't have to scan anything in anymore, because for the last 25 years, we've been using Google Images. So you just type in what you're looking for and see if you can find it. Google Images, by the way, was created after J-Lo wore this Versace dress, and they saw the number of searches for people trying to find pictures of it. So they started to develop Google Images. So thank you, J-Lo. So anyway, I guess Google Images is sort of old hat now, in a sense. There's newer problems that we have. But it's interesting to think that what it does is take pictures out of their context. Like you get, this is drawing matter, collage typed in. So you just get the pictures, you know, right click, save it without even bothering reading who did it, where's it from, whatever. Like, so if these guys were beginning to decontextualize things, or you could say, you know, the situationists were doing that, or the Dadaists were doing that. Now it's presented to us, like that's how things come to us in fragmented states. Good things about that, you know, all issues around things like gatekeeping, who's sort of in charge of like, the narratives of culture dissolve. The bad things about it, well, I think we all know exactly what the bad things about it are. This was a piece I wrote. I'll pass it around. It was I think 2017. It was about a generation of architects, which I included myself, eschewing three-dimensional software. So the kind of swirly, parametric, complicated, doubly curved shapes, all that kind of stuff, in favor of 2D stuff, like basically Photoshop. It's sort of like about why was there a reaction against it? You think like the technology developed so you can make absolutely perfect three-dimensional models, and how perfect those images were that were produced from it. But why did people stop, want to produce something else, or want to work in a different way? So here is me talking about Illustrator and Photoshop again. That talked about other types of digital space, other forms of graphic quality, which might lead to a different set of architectural propositions. So the way in which people would started to draw was oppositional to, let's say, what had become mainstream architectural, visual, formal, spatial culture at the time. Like in the same way, I suppose, that punk's ethos that you could have three chords and that you could form a band on that rather than have a guitar with two necks and 20-minute guitar solos, like Johnny Marr's rules of guitar playing, no guitar solos. But it also, I think, offers up something different. It offers up a way of, let's say, engaging with the world in a more interesting way, perhaps in a more cultural way. So I started doing these projects with students, actually. I started at the AA. This was a long time. This was by Summer Islam, who's now part of Material Cultures. She's a, fully fledged, grown-up, serious person now. This was when she was in second year. And the task was, at the AA, you have a very international group of students. The idea was you take a canonical architectural drawing and mix it with something from your own culture. So this was Summer's version of a John Haydock drawing as a Persian miniature. This was a guy called Win who combined, you can see Archigram's walking city in a Thailandish manner. We tried these experiments later. We did, Sean Griffiths and I taught a studio at Yale where we asked students to redraw Fat projects. This was after Fat had ended. This was one of our projects, St. Lucas, drawn in the style of Piranesi. And so it sort of began to be a thing that I did a lot with students, which was mixing up like ideas of authorship, different methods of drawing, many different kinds of media, which all came together, in Photoshop, basically. But you could draw, like this was a bit Aldo Rossi meets John Haydock, I think. It was a design for Alzheimer's village in Vauxhall. And this was a sort of Zaha-esque drawing of something in Chicago. Zaha meets the Shakers, I think. This was by Elnaz Rafiti. This was Zaha meets, I can't remember what. But essentially it was a kind of the Stanley Tigerman meets Hamlet. I think this was one. But it was a lot about, I suppose, how do you take things from very many sources and recombine them, partly to talk about, let's say, the relationship of architecture to other cultures. So like, how does, let's say, like various forms of different kind of cultural contexts meet the canon, and what happens when that occurs? Is it a way of, let's say, interrogating the canon, expanding the canon, reinforcing the canon even? But certainly where the page or the screen becomes a place of encounter between things which are different, not necessarily oppositional, because it's not necessarily about hating anything. It might be about finding new relationships or being able to forge things which would not be possible. What I'm trying to say is that that's possible in Photoshop in a way which it might not be possible in Grasshopper. Of course, it's very different now, where we make images using this kind of stuff. This is like some diagram explaining how AI images are made, or first of all, how images are broken down into the pieces, which then enable prompts to make images be reassembled out of the pieces which are there, which is basically break down images into tiny, tiny pieces which are tagged in so many ways, which allows then recomposition. So it's like chopping this up. It's like it's like chopping it up into very, very tiny pieces, but not in a messy way, but let's say this is blue, this is car, this is whatever, so that you'll be able to put it back together into infinite combinations. And some other exercises with students, which were kind of interested really in the ways in which that allows you to let's say, blur ideas of authorship, like things like the signature graphic style, for example, of categories, of time. So these are little examples. Piero della Francesca, painting of a distribution center, .png. John Haydock, drawing of a castle. James Sterling, axonometric drawing of Stonehenge, etc., etc. Plan of the Villa Savoie as a football pitch. Ed Richet, painting of Philip Johnson's glasshouse. So the prompts are forcing encounters between like author, mode of representation, and subject in order to produce something which is, in a sense, like a surreal drawing, a different version of a kind of exquisite corpse in a way, where you don't really know who is the author of this. Like it looks like it's drawn by a certain kind of person, but it's definitely not what they would have drawn, etc., etc. Ed Richet, painting of a Gothic distribution centre. I mean, other ways in which, like, so digital technology I think is related to, but very different from the act of collage. I mean, I think this is where it gets very murky for me, because I think collage is really about a way of working which understands that we live within media, that we are part of media, and media is part of us. It's essential to understanding of any form of cultural activity. It's the thing which connects us. It's the device from which we learn. It's the device through which we transmit, etc., etc. So these were just, I guess, some experiments. This was using some photogrammetry technology. This was first of all the collage, by the way. This is Robert Venturi, back of Robert Venturi, from the famous photos taken by Denise Scott Brown in the kind of rubble off the Vegas Strip. And it was taking pictures of a garden shed, which were then turned into, those photos turned into a model, 3D model, which was then scaled up and scaled down. And we rebuilt it. So we had the real shed, which had been scanned, a bigger shed, which was that information made bigger, and then a smaller shed, which we made smaller. So it's basically like about the transmission of architectural information and what happens when you transmit it from one state to another. And then put it back together again like a Russian doll. So here we are outside it, going through the door, an interior looking at an exterior. You can see another interior there, and we go into this, and we see in another interior, we see another building. And maybe finally, at least what I'm going to talk about. We can look at stuff and whatever in a minute. This is a project basically taken from this novel, White Noise by Don DeLillo. And it is a project about a passage from that book. I'm going to read you the passage while you look at this animated GIF. Several days later, Murray asked me about a tourist attraction known as the most photographed barn in America. We drove 22 miles into the country around Farmington. There were meadows and apple orchards. White fences trailed through the rolling fields. Soon the sign started appearing, the most photographed barn in America. We counted 5 signs before we reached the site. There were 40 cars and a tour bus in the makeshift lot. We walked along a cow path to the slightly elevated spot set aside for viewing and photographing. All the people had cameras. Some had tripods, telephoto lenses, filter kits. A man in a booth sold postcards and slides. Pictures of the barn taken from the elevated spot. We stood near a grove of trees and watched the photographers. Murray maintained a prolonged silence, occasionally scrawling some notes in a little book. "No one sees the barn," he said finally. A long silence followed. "Once you've seen the signs about the barn, it becomes impossible to see the barn." He fell silent once more. People with cameras left the elevated site, replaced by others. "We're not here to capture an image, we're here to maintain one. Every photograph reinforces the aura. Can you feel it, Jack? An accumulation of nameless energies." There was an extended silence. The man in the booth sold postcards and slides. "Being here is a kind of spiritual surrender. We only see what the others see. The thousands who were here in the past, those who will come in the future. We've agreed to be a part of a collective perception. It literally colors our vision. A religious experience in a way, like all tourism." Another silence ensued. "They are taking pictures of taking pictures," he said. He did not speak for a while. We listened to the incessant clicking of shutter release buttons, the rustling crank of levers that advanced the film. "What was the barn like before it was photographed?" he said. "What did it look like, and how was it different from the other barns? How was it similar to other barns?" We can't answer these questions because we've read the signs, seen the people snapping the pictures. We can't get outside the aura. We're part of the aura. We're here. We're now. Wonderful, wonderful book, wonderful passage. 1985, which of course is also a time of media. Let's look at it on the chart. Here we are, 1985. Architecture Must Burn, Presence of the Past. Critic, total designer, sort of Hans Hollein. Okay, that's the sort of era that we're in. Which of course talks about, culture's relationship to images and media's relationship to culture, etc., etc. Which I think collage is in that tussle. Collage is basically a battle around that question. Like, is it culture that's received, or is it culture that can be remade and reproduced? Is it a way of, let's say, just consuming the world, or can collage help us find ways to undo the world as it comes to us and put it back together in ways that we might find a little bit more acceptable, a little bit more amenable? So the last project I'll show is this one, the most photographed barn in America, which is real. This is the most photographed barn in America. It's outside of Jackson Hole in Wyoming. And these are some of the images which we downloaded from the internet of the most photographed barn in America. I think we downloaded about 350 of them. Some of them really good, some of them really shit, some of them low res, some of them high res. And we put it into this photogrammetry software. So here you can see it starting to work. It recognizes the key points of one image. very clever. But how it does this, I do not know. It can map where it thinks every single photo was taken spatially, like in relation to the subject. And that's just from the actual two-dimensional image, not through any, geographic data, GPS or location and whatever. And so it starts to then work out what the subject must be from all of these images. Now, you can use this. You can use it to scan things. I mean, it's quite easy. You can do it on your phone now. But I was kind of interested in doing it with the most photographed barn in America. But partly because it's the most photographed barn in America, obviously. So there's a lot of photos of it. But also because all the photos, just like Don DeLillo tells us, are taken from the same place, or almost all of them are taken from that, the place you get out of your car and then you take a picture and get back in the car and go to Jackson Hole and have lunch or whatever. So that the information is partial, like it's not enough information to do what the software is trying to do. So it has 350 photos, but it's struggling to understand what this object is because it doesn't really make sense. I kind of like this, the tussle that's happening within the software is to do with like the fragments in the whole. That's why I'm showing it kind of somehow in relation to Collage, I suppose. It's about images in relation to each other and what they produce. These are various steps on the way, it can't quite, I don't know, is it a building? Is it a mountain? Is it grass? I don't know. In a sense, of course, it doesn't care either. It doesn't mind. But maybe that's helpful for us to understand that architecture is also mountain and also field, and it's all one thing in some kind of gloopy, mixed up mess. But it works hard, Anyway, these models were various results from that software. Like it did actually do a pretty good job in the end. You can see those ones there. But here it's struggling. It's not sure what's going on. And then you can see it from the back. I think this one, it's just made this one up, I think, because it doesn't have the information for the back. This is much more realistic model of the most photographed barn in America because it knows it doesn't know. It doesn't know. It just kind of bleeds out. So this is not a model. These are not a model, whatever. These are not a model of the most photographed barn in America. These are models of photographs of the most photographed barn in America. So this is where the kind of architectural object and its media representation through multiplicity starts to get confused. And maybe, not that I'm not saying everything should look like this, by the way, but it's a way of understanding how enmeshed architectural production, occupation of architecture, the production of space is with all of this media, with books like this, which teach us what architecture should be. This is here, World Architecture, an Illustrated History, which, by the way, if you're curious, has a photo of a building by Palladio. This is Natalini's sketch, where he's copying this very drawing and including it in the continuous monument. That's a nice historical footnote to actually experience those together. I'm going to hand out more of these pages. I don't know how useful it's going to be for tomorrow. Useful, maybe? I'll give you some over here. Here, you can have some. And you can have some over here. So pick some good ones. Put them up here. We're not doing so well. But yeah, I've got to talk tomorrow to 20 people doing a workshop. Has anyone come? Is anyone doing the workshop? No. One of you, great. You can help me explain what we're gonna, why we're doing what we're doing. Yeah, I mean that's my talk about collage. Thank you.